Hey everyone, and welcome to the third season of Unpacked, a podcast by Afar. I'm Aislyn, and as you can probably tell by this giant microphone in front of my face, I host the show. Every week on the podcast, we unpack a different tricky topic in travel, and this week is no exception. This is Unpacked.
Madison has really grown up and become, to me, a world-class city because the things that I thought I might miss in San Francisco, like arts and culture and food, are incredibly pervasive here. And not only that, but really tops the class.
I'm Aislyn Greene, and this is Unpacked, the podcast that unpacks one tricky topic in travel each week. And this week we're returning to our Unpacking series. Now that's where we travel to different cities around the world and explore what makes them tick. Today we are heading to Madison, Wisconsin to learn why it's a world-class city, especially around food. In fact, if you're a Top Chef watcher, you may know that the latest season is set in Wisconsin and there are a bunch of Madison chefs and local spots that are featured. That voice you heard at the top of the episode belongs to Shilpa Shankaran, who founded Kosha, Madison's only Ayurvedic spa. We're going to return to her and all the very cool things that she's done. But first, let's meet someone who spends much of her life studying, writing about, and exploring Madison's food scene.
I am Lindsay Christians. I am the food editor and an arts writer at the Capital Times in Madison, Wisconsin.
Lindsay moved to Madison in 2006 for grad school. She was actually studying theater. And then she just never left.
I think a lot of people move to Madison for grad school and stay. It's the kind of place where that happens a lot.
I know that I felt that pull when I visited Madison for the first time last June. There's just something about it, the combination of outdoor beauty and then this really surprising food scene. And yes, Lindsay says, a lot of people are surprised by that.
I think we know we've been flyover country. You know, like we know we've been flyover country for a really long time. Everyone's aware of that, right?
But it's not all cheese curds and fried foods here, not by a long shot. Madison is a college town because of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but Lindsay says it's also so much more.
The rural-urban connection here is pretty strong. Like, we are surrounded by farms. So I think keeping in mind that we are part of the upper Midwest and we are part of those foodways, while also understanding that there's this effect from the university where you have people coming from all over the country, all over the world to go to this university. So I think having that kind of connection between those things has meant that our food culture reflects that. So you do see a lot of taverns and supper clubs like you would in the rest of the state. We definitely have that culture here, but we also have excellent global cuisine in a way that I don't think you would often see in a city of this size.
Madison has a population of about 675,000 in the metro area. Now, in comparison, a city like Chicago has nearly 3 million residents. But Madison is growing fast, so fast that there's actually a housing shortage, although that's a topic for another day. It's no surprise that people want to move here. It's a gorgeous city. Long before the city was built, this was actually the home of the Ho-Chunk Nation, who still maintain a strong presence in the area. What is now known as Madison is one of only 2 major American cities built on an isthmus. That's where the Capitol building sits, and it separates Lake Mendota from Lake Monona. Madison actually encompasses 5 lakes in total, so in the summertime, those are the places to be. Madison is also a Gold Star cycling city with more than 60 miles of bike paths within city limits alone. It's refreshingly progressive, really fascinating historically, and you'll also find chefs who are really leading the culinary movement. Chefs like Sean Farr.
You know, the Bay Area and Chicago have really kind of held this reign for a long time. I feel like we are the new guard kind of pushing the change in cuisine right now.
He also owns a tavern called the Muskie Lounge and Sporting Club and a more casual spot called Hank's. But at Mint Mark, he's all about using fresh local ingredients. And it turns out that in Madison, they're the real star of the show.
The food scene in Madison has a really special vibe. And I think it's due to the proximity of all these great farms that are around us. And the chefs that gravitate towards seasonal cooking are really left with this palette of incredible ingredients that it's our job not to screw them up.
Let's talk about those ingredients for a second, because as both Lindsay and Sean have mentioned, Madison is surrounded by farms. I'm sure you've heard about Wisconsin's love of dairy, but you might not know that it has more dairy farms than any other state, nearly 6,400. And it has more than 1,200 licensed cheesemakers. In other words, agriculture here is big business. Wisconsin has nearly 60,000 farms, most of which are family run. And the Dane County Farmers Market in Madison is one of the city's most famous places. It's the largest producer-only farmers market in the country, and that means that only the people who grow the produce are allowed to sell here. These producers have incredible relationships with chefs, and on my visit, the farmers market was absolutely nuts, with chefs, locals, and travelers all vying for a wedge of Wisconsin-made cheese or the famous Door County cherry.
The farmers market started more than 50 years ago now. The 50th anniversary, the Dane County Farmers Market Cookbook came out this past year. And that's really incredible, in part because what was happening in Madison in the 1970s and 1980s is right alongside what was happening with Alice Waters and with Chez Panisse in Berkeley. Our locavore movements, the farm-to-table stuff, started at the same time. And I think that's something people don't know.
Odessa Piper was one of those early locavore pioneers. In 1976, she opened one of Madison's most famous restaurants called L'Etoile. Many have actually referred to it as the Midwest Chez Panisse. Odessa opened the restaurant with a then radical notion. She wanted to rely only on local growers. L'Etoile is located just a few steps from the farmers market, and Odessa spent years cultivating these relationships with growers. In 2005, she sold the restaurant to her chef de cuisine, Tori Miller. And though Odessa had a lot of influence on Madison's culinary scene early on, Lindsay says that the food scene has since taken on a life of its own.
Food scene we have now is one that she helped seed, but is not, with all respect to her, because she's wonderful, it is not one that she has continued to create. She was an early pioneer, and she was one of many. A lot of the chefs that she worked with had more technique than she did, had more training than she did, and were able to kind of take that vision and take it further.
Tori Miller is one of those people. He is now one of Madison's most influential chefs. And yes, he still helms L'Etoile, but he also opened a more casual restaurant called Gray's, also right across from the farmers market. There, he merges his Wisconsin and Korean heritages. He has continued to evolve L'Etoile, which is definitely a fine dining destination, and he's continued this locavore tradition that Odessa started. And he is now passing the torch to other chefs.
And then now we're seeing people who work for Tori open their own places. And so he is passing on this kind of legacy as well of this really close connection to the farms and the people who are growing things here.
So today, if you throw a carrot in Madison, you're going to find a great restaurant that, like L'Etoile, celebrates local produce. Restaurants like Sean's Mint Mark. It's a small plates kind of place where the menu changes up to 7 times a week, but there are 2 items that he swears diners won't let him take off the menu.
The cauliflower, which is a roasted cauliflower tossed in bagna cauda with white wine plumped golden raisins and frica, or crispy like Parmesan cheese on top. So there's a lot of acid, a lot of umami from the anchovies and garlic. It was an absolute like throwaway dish for me. I was trying to come up with this like super, I guess almost like a croque madame cauliflower dish, and I made it, and it was so rich and heavy, and I just don't like eating like that anymore. So I literally just like the day before we opened threw some cauliflower in the fryer and tossed it in bagna cauda and lemon juice, and I was like, oh, this is it.
And then there's a killer biscuit.
I knew I wanted to put these biscuits on the menu because they're straight fire. But, I was like, yeah, they'd probably go with garlic honey, and I know cultured butter is delicious. So I literally put it on the menu without trying it. And about 3 months in, I tried it. I was like, oh, this is what everybody's talking about. That's really good. Great.
Sean says the food scene has always been great here.
One of the coolest things was the various ethnic cuisines you got to try, especially in like the old school State Street scene, himu chili, and kind of just throw a dart and you'd usually end up at something pretty good.
But he says it's changed in the last decade or so.
Well, there's been, I would say, a massive change in the food culture and food scene in Madison, especially even when I was here the first go round. At one point, there's more restaurants than anywhere else per capita.
A lot of the change has been spurred by chefs who have moved here from other places or were born and raised here and then moved away. Chefs like Itaru Nagano of Fairchild. Itaru was once the chef de cuisine at L'Etoile, and in 2023, he and his fellow Fairchild chef Andrew Kroger won Best Chef in the Midwest at the James Beard Awards, which are like the food world's Oscars.
So I grew up here and then I moved away for a long time, and then I've been back for 11 years.
Itaru was living in New York, a city he loved, but he wanted a slower pace of life without having to sacrifice his culinary aspirations.
We're so